This is Fiona Lane with the Rossland Museum. It's July 12th, 2025, and we're here at the Rossland Museum doing an oral history interview.
This is Sarah Taekema-Slot, Research Manager at the Rossland Museum.
Derek Trussler. Grew up in Rossland, but I was born in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario.
Grant Rutherglen. I was born in Rossland, Rose Hospital in 1951.
Don Stevens. I was born in Rossland in 1963.
Brian Fry, born in Trail in 1963 and moved to Rossland in 1964.
Chris McIver. I was born in Noranda, Quebec and moved to Rossland in 1964.
How did you start skiing? Or why did you start skiing?
Derek Trussler here. My dad was he lived and grew up in Ontario and just loved the West. Came out. He's an avid skier. He still is today. He's 88 years old. Skis 4 or 5 days a week. So that's how much he was into it and got me into it at a very young age, about 3, I believe. Here in Rossland, we moved out here early, and he would drag us up to the hill whether we liked it or not, and I guess that helped in the long run for me.
Grant Rutherglen. I started skiing when I was about 5 or 6, so that's about 1957. We had a family pass Red Mountain, and it was a family thing to go to the ski hill. Started in 1957, so that's 68, 69 years of skiing. Kind of a habit now. Go skiing.
Don Stevens. I started skiing when I was about 2. My father grew up here in Rossland as well, was born as well. And he ski raced with the national ski team way back when and was always involved in ski racing. So we were pretty much always involved in ski racing right from the very beginning.
Your father's Bill Stevens.
Bill Stevens is my father, yes.
So I didn't have any ski racing history in my family, I don't believe, but interesting in getting ready for this, I found a picture yesterday of my grandfather, Ian Fry, from 1937 as part of the Rossland Ski Club, or at least pictures around the Rossland Ski Club, and my grandmother, Jeanette Fry, so they were in their 20s, and found these amazing pictures. So I had a history around skiing, and then my father was an avid skier, and I always remember him telling stories about going skiing with a dime. You had to pay a dime to get up the chairlift, and he used to not try to pay because he only had one dime. So as soon as he paid his dime, his day was over. And so he would sneak on the lift all day long. Anyways, and I believe in 1968, when I was 5 years old, I seem to remember him taking me down the face of Red for my very first ski run. And it took all afternoon. Yeah, all afternoon to get down. And I just remember going from one mogul to the next, and then maybe falling or whatever, getting back up, and then the next mogul to the next, all the way down. They were huge moguls, much bigger than they are today, I can say, you guys, because everybody had such big skis. So, yeah, got me into it, and then put me into Nancy Green Ski League somewhere along the way, and that was it. I was into ski racing.
And that's your father, Merv Fry.
Merv Fry, yeah.
I don't know how many people can say their first run was the face of Red, and that got them into skiing.
Yeah. You know, Chris McIver, I think my background's a bit different. My parents are English and they immigrated to Quebec. That's where I was born. And then we came in a year to Rossland after I was born. And my parents didn't ski. I just skied a little bit in Quebec. But my dad, both my parents were pretty avid skiers. And actually my dad ended up on the executive on the club for a number of years. And my mom used to take us up kind of babysitting when I was 2 and 3. And that's kind of where we started skiing.
That's the Red Mountain Ski Club.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you know, we could go back to Nancy Green Ski League. I don't know if you guys remember Nancy Green Ski League.
I do.
I'm trying to remember, because I don't know, I just found another picture yesterday of me standing in the gate about 8 years old. And I think so, I don't know when the Nancy Green Ski League started for us, but...
Oh, it was there for a while.
Well, so Nancy Green won in 1968, and when was the Nancy Green Ski League created? So
next year.
So, yeah, so...
Or longer, but it was just a weekend thing every Sunday.
Yeah.
You went
okay.
and somebody set, like Bill Stevens, or somebody would set a course, and the kids could go ski through it.
With metal poles, I remember.
Some of them were, yeah.
Could have been pine trees.
Good memory. See, you remembered. Metal poles. remember the bamboo poles, but metal, some were metal.
Metal poles, you remember?
Oh, yeah.
And I always remember there's this one girl that would beat all of us. At least she beat me anyways, Dee Dee Hayes.
When we were young.
When we were young.
Your age or older?
She was a year younger than us.
Younger.
And her
Only
dad,
1 year.
her dad played an instrumental role in another character, Jimmy Haight, played an instrumental role in helping all of us throughout our careers, but he really worked hard on trying to make sure his kids were great ski racers. And
Well, he had a plan.
Dee Dee was phenomenal.
Yeah, she was amazing.
It was all in his plan.
Thing that stands out to me with all that is how we started with the flag. Remember waving the flag?
Yeah, I forgot that.
And then the timer at the bottom would hit the stopwatch.
Yeah.
Back in those days, that's
And you had to have good eyes because you had to see the flag going up to ready, set, and the red flag would be straight up. You get your watch ready and your eyeballs. And then
Oh my
you'd
gosh, Derek.
when it was go, you'd go click.
yeah.
To see little kids race down the mountain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's how
For
you
the
timed
timing.
The
it.
timing, yeah.
Somebody else would be with a pen, and you'd say 33.8, and they'd write it down. And that was pretty accurate compared to the.
0.8 might not be quite.
Well,
30, 40, close enough.
1987, I questioned the 200ths of a second that he came second.
Right.
I wanted to know if that was accurate.
The Canadian juveniles, yeah.
At the start of Nancy Green, my mom she ran the Nancy Green program. My dad set the courses all the time when we first started because they were heavily involved in that. So there was no way my brother and I were out of ski racing, that's for sure. We did it. But it was only Sunday afternoon. They'd set a course and you had to make 2 runs. And unfortunately, they made us hike all the time. I don't know why, but
Because he
that's
did.
what you did. Yeah,
Because he did.
that's what my dad did. So you had to hike up as well. And just Tower 5. Well,
Yeah, Tower 5.
Tower 5 and a red chair, which is basically the same as it is now, and down to the bottom.
This is awesome.
And then and all the timing was they'd break into teams, so it was there's never an individual one. It was always a team that won,
Yeah, they wanted a team
and
sport.
so they'd average them out so that not every team would win every single week. It was everyone would get a ribbon or something like that throughout the year, and that's the way it ran for long past. We were out of the town squad. Then it was it still went on after that.
So then what sort of gap do you think as they develop the program into being more consistent and more intensive, what role do you think that sort of played in the community and in ski racing?
I think Mike Delich came in then, right? To the town squad phase, I think. And he is, even to this day, he's so strategic, so deep thinker about how to make things successful, and everything. He's even helped me with business stuff over the years and all kinds of things. So it's amazing. But he came along, and Teresa Delich too, his sister, if I remember correct. She was quite involved, and I just remember him being very intense and very focused on helping us to be successful. And I remember these guys kicking my butt. They were all way better ski racers than me. I remember that.
But sorry, go ahead, Derek.
Give yourself some credit, Brian.
I was not a great athlete, if you guys remember.
But I think what Mike wanted to do is, what was happening with the Nancy Green League was, like Don said, it was just on Sunday afternoons. But there was a real crying out in the parents and especially the kids for wanting more, and that's where Mike came in and gave you more. He said, okay, let's take these guys that are really keen to ski and to ski together every weekend, so now we can make it Saturday and Sunday, and you can be in the Nancy Green League, and we'll have Grand Forks get involved and Nelson get involved and so on. So now we can have a league. And so he wanted the talent squad to get all these kids saying, I'm not just going to come up here and ski a run or two on Sunday. I'm skiing all day Saturday and all day Sunday. So now you have to have coaches.
And I'm competing. Is that where the competition came in?
It was still a pretty easygoing team race.
I would say that the unique thing about it was, and I've never experienced it since, when I look back at what kids do, and granted you're way better at this than me, but excuse me, it wasn't a competition. It was just skiing, and we skied a lot. We'd ski from the lifts open to close. We'd all have lunch together.
Yep.
But we just skied, and we skied the whole mountain. We didn't just ski, icy. We'd ski powder. We'd ski everything. And I think that really set us up
Yes.
to become good skiers first, and then became racers after.
And the coaches were with us almost all the time, right?
Yeah.
I think that's what you're saying.
And I've never, I mean, Derek, you would know, but there's not that many programs. Since when I was still racing, they kind of went away. That kind of program went away. Young kids went to Gates.
Yeah,
A very different kind of way of looking at it. And maybe more successful, but I don't think so.
I don't think so either. And I think for us, I mean, one of the stories that I always think of that made me, all of us, better skiers was, I don't know if you guys remember when Grant would put down the challenge of who could do the fewest turns down the cliff.
Yep.
Whoever could do the fewest turn, we got it down to like 2 turns over the, back then there was no grooming, so there's moguls and everything, and
Top of the cliff to at least Tower 5.
to the start of our course, right?
Yeah.
So and we would just every run. So our skiing outside of actual training was massive. Whereas, it's not the same anymore.
But I also had a program where we had to warm up with you guys to go up to the T-bar. Then we had to go up the T-bar and do our space exercise.
Which means jumping
Like
back
this.
and forth down the hill and holding yourself, not moving. You're just jumping back and forth.
So I was my first year of coaching with these guys. And part of the program that I got from some of my peers, Don Lyons and from Sweden, was the free skiing was important, really important. And the European kids would ski the top to the bottom of the whole run. So you don't stop at the top of a knoll. And I remember telling these guys that you don't stop. You're going to go non-stop from the top of Granite to the bottom. And that's what we did. And we had to have about 4 runs, remember? I said, okay, I want 4 runs of non-stops before we go over and put some GS gates on the face of Red. And these guys could go from the top of Granite to the bottom of Granite nearly at the time that it took for the Canadian Championship downhill. So that was 2.5 minutes to 2:45, so take 2:20. Well, these guys were coming top to bottom on Granite, free skiing, and I said, when we made it, set a track. You go from one side of the hill to the other. Luckily, there wasn't that many people on the mountain because we terrorized the mountain for that short period. So there'd be 10 kids going as fast as they can go from one side of the mountain to the other and over top of the knolls. That was the rule. You don't stop and top and look down. You ski over it and prepare for your turn. You remember that?
Oh, I remember. You couldn't do that today.
So that's what we
Isn't that
did.
Yeah.
We continued the skiing part of it.
And to just add on to that, I skied with Don this year for a day, and he still skis exactly like that. 800 miles an hour, straight down the mountain.
Yeah, no, he's
Hasn't changed
turning.
a bit.
No, he's turning. There's super G, but
Yeah.
he's turning.
Yeah, there's a tight turns I made this year.
So how are kids recruited for the program? Is it just anyone who wanted to sign up, or were you looking for people? Or
Well, Mike Dallas started that recruiting by saying, "This is the talent squad."
I want all our friends were doing this. These guys were all involved, and I think I wanted to get involved.
Well, it was they were special already. Mike had got them talent squad, so that means talent. So they had something going, and he continued. That's where it became important because he continued to say, "This is a group, a really neat group. Come and join us."
But I think it kind of picked itself in a way because you had to give up your whole weekend. And so there were we had a lot of kids in the talent squad. It wasn't just 4 or 5. I mean,
About 15 or so.
yeah. So it was a pretty big group for Rossland. But some kids didn't want to ski it all weekend, every weekend. And so that's kind of, it wasn't like anybody was thrown out or anything like that.
But that's 15 families that are on board. That was the beginning of the Red Mountain Racers that started.
so to be in it, you were committing to the whole weekend.
Yeah.
You couldn't do it halfway.
Yeah, you could, but you wouldn't be in the talent squad anymore, or you'd be missing out. That would be the big thing.
Yeah, the Nancy Green program was, like I said, was just an afternoon program, so there were a lot more people. And then when Mike came along and it happened to be as we were advancing, he said, "I'm going to take you out." And that was really the first formal coaching that we had, because he would get out and we would do exercises like skiing technique and stuff a lot of the time as we went down. And there was 2 years we were with the town squad, and then by then we were old enough to move into the next level of racing where you traveled around a little bit more. But
And so who was our next coaches? You guys remember? Chris thinks that Jack Woods was right after that.
Jack had just he'd just retired from the national ski
One
team.
season?
He was there 1 year.
Yeah.
He just retired, and then they hired him as a coach.
And so we had Mark Duffus in there somewhere too.
I thought he was an assistant.
Yeah, I thought so too.
But-
Yeah, I think he.
I think he was an assistant coach.
Are you thinking of Pat Daly?
No, he came when I came.
Yeah,
He was my first assistant.
Maybe Mark was the coach then.
maybe, I don't know, yeah.
Yeah.
But Jack Woods was,
His,
Yeah, he was our
his
first.
name is written on the skis of the Windy Rose site for the Old Bastards powder team. It says Mark Duffus there. I just noticed it. Oh my gosh.
yeah.
But I think as a group, when we were young, we all knew each other through skiing, even though, Chris lived on the other side of town from Brian, Derek, and I.
I was still in Lower Rossland.
He's still
You're still
Lower
Lower
Rossland.
Rossland, but you were up in
We
Nevada,
went to
and we were
Cook
on the
Avenue.
other end.
At Cooney Avenue, it wasn't exactly that flashy.
But Don, in Chris's defense, by grade 3, you moved to the
I
upper
did.
part of Rossland.
Yeah, you did.
Across
So
the highway.
you went off to that McLean school and left the rest of us at Cook Avenue School.
Alden and Derek went up there.
I went up there for
Fancy
grade
grounds.
7, yeah.
Grade 7, yeah.
Oh, right.
Pinewood that was kind of it.
Yeah, we were-
Definitely moved the other side of the tracks in those days.
But I remember when I was, there were basically 2 runs really on Red. There's the face of Red down the cliff, or there was the back trail. And my mom used to take me skiing during kindergarten, so after kindergarten or before, depending if we were in the afternoon or the morning class, and we would ski the rest of the time. I didn't know it at the time, but my mom couldn't ski down the cliff. She had only learned to ski a couple of years before me, but I'd always say, and whether this is true or not, Chris can vouch, I always heard that Chris was skiing down the cliff of Red, and I'd always go, I gotta go down the cliff of Red so I can ski like he can. And I'd take my mom down, and I'd get over there where it got really steep and go, no, we're going down the back trail. And like every single run we'd do that. So I don't know if he really was going down, but I thought he was.
Well, he had to follow his brother.
But we were, yeah, 'cause you had your older brother.
Yeah.
What was interesting about this whole thing is I heard these guys say that your dad was on the executive, and I'm not sure if Merv was.
I don't think it was.
Your dad was
Oh,
for
yeah.
sure for a long time, and my dad was on the executive, and
Derek's
matter of
dad.
fact,
Derek's
Derek's
dad.
dad.
and was
Yeah, that was. He was.
yeah. So that's the thing where it went from family to family, and they came back and gave. So even my dad was on the Red Mountain Ski Club executive with his dad.
I think that's the critical thing that I don't know if we've said, right?
So that's interesting to see how the development of these guys went by family.
Mhm.
So all those families were involved.
The passion was transferred, whether through force or enjoyment.
Yes.
So there was there was the ski club for the resort, whatever it's called, and then there was the Red Mountain Racers, right?
Yeah,
Club as well.
that was after, but the Red Mountain Ski Club
Yeah.
had an executive,
And that's what you're talking about.
and Bill Stevens was on that executive,
And Dave Trussler.
and so was Steve Ash in the end.
Yeah.
And Mike
He-
Delich was too.
Peter was on it. McIver.
Yeah.
And my dad was on the executive too, Frank Moore. I mean, what I'm saying is that if my dad, would be 110 years old now, if he's on the executive, as a family, we had 4 of us in a family that came up here with our 1957 Chevy wagon, and Bill Stevens was just arriving as a young man with his family, but he was on the board of directors too, because, and I'm sure George was too, one time. But that's how it went. Like you said before, that family said, okay, and I'm going to come back and help out. And so all these guys' dads were on the executive as well as my dad.
And Mike Delich joined the executive under my dad and was there. He was there when the Paradise Lift went in.
Yeah.
But actually, an interesting fact when we were all young, I don't know you guys, but Derek and I for sure, Mike and his brothers were childcare for us. They
Yes.
were our babysitters when we were
Mike
really young.
Delich?
Yeah.
Chris
All of
Stellison
them
was
did.
just here. Told
And
me that
Donald.
story the other day, and he
Another
said
brother,
he
Donald.
said this. Strangely enough, the Stevens kids were just bouncing off the wall. They were, but then Derek also told the story that
Oh, well, yeah, Chris Delich, Mike's brother, was I think he was one of my first babysitters. I'll never forget. I mean,
Yeah.
I've been really into music all my life, and he's the guy that he came over one day, and who's this guy? And he had these rock and roll records, and man, that was it. I was into rock and roll all because of Chris Delich.
And then I go visit Derek, and he would play the music for me, and I started getting the albums. So that's what got me going into it too.
Yeah, so there was a tight connection with the Delich family, really.
But Mr. Delich had Delich Jewelry in town,
Right.
and then they had Mike and Donald and Chris and Teresa and Roberta, and they all 5 of them skied, so that family skied, and then it just went.
A lot of legacy.
Everybody joined in.
Do you have any good stories about the coaches? Any anecdotes or impressions of of your coaches?
I do remember going to a race in the
He's got
States,
one.
States with Mike, and him pushing us pretty hard. He had big expectations. Do you remember them going to the U.S. for a race, you guys?
Chawila.
Is that where it was? It was Chihuahua.
49 degrees north.
Yeah, 49 degrees.
Yeah.
Was down
Yeah,
there last
Yeah.
year.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It was really important that we didn't
Nice
all
now.
remember that.
Yeah.
So what did he do to? He was just on
he
you
was
to-
he was a very focused guy when we were young, and I just remember the feeling this is important.
We really started traveling with Grant.
Yeah.
That was when and we traveled a lot for 12 and 13-year-olds. And we were always in a van or a bus,
That school bus was
And-
deadly.
and we'd stay in these really bad hotels. And it was really great.
Super 8s now.
Yeah, exactly.
My first memory of traveling was Phoenix Mountain.
Yeah, I remember.
Was that our
race.
first race
So
that we traveled?
that was a
Grand
Nancy
Forks.
That was a
Green
Nancy
race.
Green race.
Really?
Phoenix Mountain, I remember that
Phoenix,
race.
yeah.
I didn't even know Phoenix was around when we were
Oh, yeah.
kids.
Oh yeah.
That was the first time I remember traveling as
Yeah.
a team.
And we had a bus.
Yeah.
That was pretty cool.
And I remember going to Phoenix and Merv Fry, we were going to Phoenix and he goes, Phoenix, Arizona, you guys have it. And I was pumped, we're going to Phoenix, Arizona on a ski trip, and we ended up just outside of Grand Forks.
With one T-bar, one little rope
Yeah.
tow.
That was a tough T-bar.
Yeah.
So how old were we then?
It was a Nancy
12.
Green race. Yeah,
11,
maybe,
12.
Maybe.
Oh my
Well,
gosh,
we would-
I guess I was there.
But we were 12, and we would go to the high school in the fall, and Grant would have us. We'd go for a run, then we'd be doing exercises, and then we'd be playing soccer, doing something.
Well, we had
We'd do that.
Tuesdays and Thursdays
Tuesdays and
dryland
Thursdays,
training.
dryland training.
Cross
yeah.
promenade.
And cross promenade. Yeah, we did all. I mean, we did a lot back then, just as young.
That was around Drake's farm, right? Is
That was later.
Oh, later.
I built the cross promenade out of Drake's got it from the Sweden head coaches at Sweden, and their dryland training was they were really big on this cross promenade for cardio, and so you had to go continuous running, and then I built it around a dairy farm in Rossland here in the South Belt, Drake's Dairy Farm, and we had stations where you had to jump over the logs, and that was ski training hops. And then we had to strengthen up the body, so we had a tugboat rope, which was about that big, and I went up and across 2 trees by 30 feet, and then down, and they had to rope up, and then rope across, and then down, and that was another station. And then you had stations where you had to do tucks, and then you had stations where you had to run between, and I put bamboo poles in the dirt with a bar, and then I had back surgery after. And then you had to run between. So it's all in the book, and the photos are in the book. And McIver's winning. He's running down the slope with his blonde hair going up in the air.
See it blonde again.
Yeah, this is
Lighter
Arctic.
blonde now.
This is Arctic blonde. Yeah, and I got it too, really bad.
But the favorite training we used to go down the trail and on the riverbank, the
There you go.
sand, right?
Right.
And we'd put in poles and we'd run a course, and we'd do that like for 3 hours.
Yeah.
And then you hike back up, and then you go back down. And there was probably, again, 12 or 15 of us that would do that.
Yeah.
It was super fun.
Yeah, Charlie Coughlin helped with
Yeah.
that at first because I needed the rope. I got the big tug rope and we tied it at the, but it was so steep and it would sink when you were coming back up that you had to hold yourself on the rope. But I would time them from the start gate through the sand in a GS type course. And again, there's pictures of sandhill training in the book. But these guys went on the first experience with, and it was the Columbia Riverbank.
Yeah.
It was steeper, longer, and softer sand.
Yeah.
And it was an amazing workout. But I mean, these guys were doing flips accidentally, from falling down in the sand, and it would be in their hair and everything else. But on a hot day, that was training. So we got, before these guys went to the BC team, we had some pretty tough characters as far as dryland training goes. They knew what dryland training was about, and they kept coming. They came on their bikes out to my house, which was at the Drake's, and then from there they signed in a name, and their name and the time, and then they leave their bikes in my garage, and then they had to go, and they had to go with 2 or more. So you didn't want to go alone because there's bears and cougars and all sorts of terrible things up in the bush. But that's how we did it. And each station had a place that they had memorized what they had to do for that dryland training. And there's written and there's photos in the book. So
in addition to incredible coaching that we had, the competition between all of us was amazing, right? If any one of us was out doing dryland, the other ones were going, okay, we got to get up there to do dryland. And so, yeah, and then you wanted to be signed in, you wanted to be involved, and then not just in dryland, but on the race course, everything. I think we were always leapfrogging each other.
Always training, always leapfrogging, yeah. And then helping each other too. The other thing was, remember Kenny Stevens was that we went to the high school for dryland training Tuesdays and Thursdays, and we had to run the stairs, up and down the stairs, so that was part of it. And then we had the stretching part. Remember we had the silent part?
Mm-hmm. I love the silent.
Oh, yeah.
So I talked to them, and they all had to be on the gym floor flat. And then I made them think about their elbows sinking into the floor. So it was some really neat yoga type stuff, and they could float and everything, and then they'd all be asleep.
Yeah.
So any other coaches that came would say, "How do you do that? They're all sleeping."
I'm
So-
sure Chris was snoring.
Yeah. He could have been.
That was later in life.
Yeah, he could have been. But we had the rope climb, and we had all sorts of different things, and I called it circuit training. Remember?
Yeah, right.
And so we had to do the run on the stairs, then we had to do circuit training, and then we had to do stretching at the end. Once in a while we'd get gymnastics, we'd get on the trampoline, and then we broke some ankles and some wrists,
Oh, yeah.
and that didn't work very well.
We did a lot of mat tumbling to learn how to fall. I remember you teaching us that.
Yeah, we did gymnastics, and then one year we had we had the chin-up bar, and Kenny, Don's older brother, couldn't do a chin-up at the time. So these guys, everybody's in there, giving him a lift, pushing him, "Come on, Kenny!" And pretty soon Kenny could do a chin-up. So that was a team thing. The dryland training was every Tuesday and Thursday, 6 o'clock. You got to be there.
Is that year round?
Yeah, it would be September till mid-December. As soon as you're away skiing, now your fitness has got to be there. Now we're going to try and hold a level, we call it. So we'd go on a run if we were racing somewhere. But for the most part, the circuit training was over. So they kind of liked the end of November. That training was over, and it was more skiing. But the interesting part was John Platt coached me, and I did circuit training Tuesdays and Thursdays with John Platt. So John Platt coached the national team. John Platt came back and coached Red Mountain. And there you have again, some more family things.
John was an original Red Mountain racer as well.
So John Platt was the same time as Bill Stevens.
The story that I remember in particular that affected me in my life was there was, for some reason, some national ski team members training at Red. Do you remember this, Grant?
I do.
You remember this? Anyways, they were training, and there was a coach. What was that?
There were several times they came and trained here.
But I remember this one particular time, and one of the national ski team coaches was there, and I don't know if you got us. I think we ran the course as well, if I remember correct. And so then the coach saw us ski, talked to you about how well we were skiing, and then you passed on at that moment. Something about that coach just said, "You guys are good enough to make it to the national ski team," and that was the moment where my head shifted. Really? Are we that?
That rings a bell, Brian.
It was my moment in time where I felt, my gosh.
And Jermaine Barrett.
Yeah.
Jim Hunter was there.
Yeah, it was interesting.
What were the guys out of Banff?
Minodes.
Minot, Peter.
Yeah.
Peter and
What was interesting,
all
I mean,
those
I'm not sure what year that was. I was a little bit like a couple years into us racing, but because when they came and trained, because there's Gary Aiken from Rossland and Jim Hunter, Jungle Jim Hunter, and Jermaine Barrett were the three that I kind of remember later because, you know, Gary being a local guy, we got to break up and ski with people, and sure enough, I had to go with Gary, the local guy. Who's he? He was my next door neighbor for a long time. But later when Chris and I were in the national ski team for the downhill team, Jermaine Barrett was our coach years later.
Right.
So, and that's why I was kind of, hey, I remember your name.
Yeah.
You came and trained with us.
Yeah, he was with me too.
Yeah.
He was the guy. He got injured the same time I did, and he came back from Europe with me on the plane. He took care of me.
Yeah.
But I think what happened was nobody really knew about these four guys and all the ones that were going along with them. So we had, a dozen kids that were potentially good at that level, but nobody except coaches like Jermaine who would come in and see them at a race. So one of the stories I thought Derek might remember is they were called Pontiac Cups, and I won the Pontiac Cup in 1973, so that was a history. And Pontiac Cup was a really important part of Canadian ski racing because it was a series that you could go from one race to the next in the west and one race to the next in the east, and then you'd come together in the spring. So I took these guys to Jasper. So you go the night before to the meeting, and you get your racers get a number, and you make sure that they got a good number on the board and that everybody's in their seeds, everything's just right. So I came out in the morning and said, okay, here's your numbers. And by this time there's about 5 guys surrounding me that are 6 foot, except for Chris, he was about 5'11".
Oh yeah, 5'11". And you're 5'10".
Yeah, in my eyes that was it was a circle. And I said, okay, here's your numbers. So I handed him number 1, and then 3, and then 4, and then 7, and then to 15. Everybody got their number. So I said, now you guys are going to help me set. You remember? I had to set. So we go to the top, and you guys had to stay with me. Your numbers are on, and they've got to memorize the course, but I got to set it first. So we're setting, and they're passing me poles. What better way to learn the course? So that's when I said, remember you said in your dreams, or you're dreaming? I said, okay, you pack the poles.
Derek won that race, didn't
He did.
he? Yeah, I remember that.
And I got halfway down, and there was a side hill, and I had to go over top, which is an open gate like this, and then a closed gate like this. So you could come low and go underneath, or you could make the turn so it would go over top, and you wouldn't lose rhythm, and you wouldn't have to delay. So I asked him to choose, and you chose over top, because he could ski. He had lots of rhythm, and it was soft snow, and he's number 1. So I said, you can win this. And
But I
he
think
chose over top.
To the point that, having 4 people that you went to kindergarten with, and every year one of us was good.
Yeah.
For every race.
Well, usually it was like 1 year, one of us would dominate that year.
Yeah,
and then the next year would be another one of us. And then so you're always chasing. And it wasn't competitive, it was competitive, but it wasn't against the person who's winning. It was more just, I should do better.
exactly.
And I think on that, Chris, for me anyway, and I'm sure you guys would say, there was a lot of pride that all of us were so solid.
Yeah.
You know, like if I was lagging and Chris was going fast, yeah, that's awesome. You know, we're still kicking it here, you know.
Yeah.
But and I coached for 30 years after I quit, and I can tell you that when we did dryland and things like that, like we would happily push each other until we were coughing up blood. It didn't really matter. Like, you know, and you know, with all those years of coaching that I have yet to see a group of young guys who are just willing to
So true.
push each other along.
So
you know, and
That's the key.
Yeah.
It was such a camaraderie thing in this group, and it was an unusual situation. So we got to the bottom of setting that course. He said over top, yeah, okay, are you guys happy with this? Yeah. In the circle again, at the bottom of the course, I said, okay, I want 6 in the top 5, and I don't care who ties. And these guys are 15 maybe, I don't know, they're kind of going, what did you say? What the hell is that? 6 in the top 5? So we got 5 in the top 7 because Hansen came 7th in that race. So that's why I think a lot of times it went race to race too.
But you know, I also think being from Rossland and a Red Mountain racer, you know, we would race against people from Ontario and Quebec and the big cities, and they had big money, and even Vancouver was big money, and
That's right.
And we would go and we would routinely beat them quite handily. And you know, Dawn's mom made my first downhill suit. And your mom made downhill suit. I don't know if your mom did. My mom wasn't a good seamstress, so but you know, like that's what we were racing in. And they were buying suits, and we were like, and it was cool.
Yeah, Descents.
We were the country bumpkins coming and beating the city boys.
Yeah,
No
it was
kidding.
really fun.
Yeah.
It was super fun.
To the point where when we made the BC ski team, all 4 of us at the same time, Glenn Wertel said he had trouble raising money because he got his money from Vancouver at the time, and he said there's no Vancouver kids on this team.
Right.
So remember back then the struggle he had that year raising money.
He said to me, Glenn Wertel said to me, because he ran the BC team himself, he was an entrepreneur type guy, but he said to me, he said, Ruther, what do you do? What's with it? Have you got any more guys like that coming up? He said these guys are great. He said they get up on the van, they pack the stuff, they help out, they're always packing, they're always doing the right stuff on the mountain. He said, well, what do you feed them? What are you doing?
Yeah, so what do you think it was that made you so, like, you know, looking to have that camaraderie and the collaboration? Is it just, it happened to be, you know, hit the jackpot with the U group, or like?
Yeah,
I think it
part
was-
of it was, but they were so
Yeah.
I think
they
it
were
was,
so together.
I think it was a reflection of right back to, you know, the early days. What's his name? Oldest Gilness. You know, if I look back through the history, all the things that happened, there was this whole chain of events that led to the fact that we had this. We had an incredible environment here, and then, of course, the Nancy Green results and everything else, all the other successes, Olympic successes, but Nancy especially in the
But
whole
when did George
program.
go to the Olympics in Oslo?
52.
So 1952, Red Mountain produced an Olympian skier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
1960 as well.
And then in 60, who went?
It would have been Don Berneski.
Yeah. And then 64, Nancy and
Well,
Liz.
there were several. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Squaw Valley came, and then Nancy and Liz went. So from 1952, George.
4 years after that ski lift went in, the Red Mountain lift.
Yes.
As an Olympian.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing too is when we were kids, you could hitchhike to the hill, and it was simple. And
Well, you were
it was-
allowed to.
I was allowed to.
Peter was a nice
But,
guy.
well, my parents didn't care that much. But,
That's going in the box later.
But it's sort of like being in
That-
Europe. That's how they ski. They just walk out their door and they ski. And we would go to a class in the morning, and our school was really helpful. Like we didn't have a ski program that wasn't an elite program, but our teachers, you know, we would go to a class first thing in the morning. Then we go ski for 2 or 3 hours, and then come back and catch our last class. And we did that all the time, and it was kind of okay. And so we skied and we night skied.
Yeah.
It was just so available for us. And so I think it was very unique. In Canada, it's unique for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, Whistler might be building that a bit now, but
But it was
we have
unique
an
in
awful lot of
Rossland.
money. And it was affordable for the average family. Like, you didn't have to be wealthy, which unfortunately today,
Yeah.
you kind of have to be
So
wealthy.
true,
Yeah.
Chris.
You know,
So-
a good story about that was, I remember you and I went to the Canadian Juvenile Championships when we were 12 in
Yeah.
Whistler.
Yeah.
I can't remember if you were there or not.
Yeah, yeah.
Derek was there. So the
Were you
three of
there?
us.
No, I didn't go until I was 15.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember this story, but you know, we went there and we had one pair of skis for every event we were in. And Chris had these old HRP comp head skis
Yeah.
with like the oldest, you know, marker binding on it possible.
Impact binding?
And he was riding up the lift with the marker rep from Ontario, and the guy looks down and says, "Are these your training skis?" And Chris says, "Nope, they're my race skis. They're my skis," is what he said. And he goes, "Well, don't come to me to look at those bindings. I've never worked on something that old before." And that's what he was racing in. And we all had stuff like that. So we were, but that was our first year.
Nancy Green lent us her house.
Yeah, we
Like,
stayed at her house.
We all stayed at her house. It was like 12 or 15. We had parents there.
Yeah.
They left the house, and it was like for a week, right? We were there
Yeah.
for like 10 days.
Yeah, it was
it was
pretty fun.
remarkable.
Jeez.
3 different events.
Yeah.
Slalom, giant slalom, and downhill.
Yeah.
No Super G yet.
No, we actually had to have a downhill before
We did
the
downhill
events because
first.
we'd never raced downhill before. So we had to have a pre-downhill. Remember that?
Yeah.
We did the pre-downhill, and then we qualified to go into the Canadian Nationals for all 3 events. But it was super. It was very unique, I think.
Yeah, it was. I mean, that was our first time. So we ended up racing. I mean, it was Canadian juvenile champs, so it was kids from all across the country, and probably our first time experience people from everywhere that we had to compete against. And
So that was a huge motivator for me because I couldn't go when I was 12. I didn't go when I was 13. I guess maybe we were 14. Whatever. What was the age we were? 15.
15, you couldn't go anymore.
Yeah, 14.
Yeah.
In my 14th year, that's the only time I raced Canadian juveniles.
And you came second in the
Here.
downhill, didn't you?
No,
I came second.
By 2 100s.
Derek came third in the GS,
Yeah.
and
Dee won the
weren't you up there in the slalom somewhere, Chris?
5th.
I don't know.
I've got the results here somewhere.
Yeah, you were up there.
You brought-
Interesting enough, though, with the juveniles that he's talking about, we had juvenile championships as well. We didn't have a BC ski team, but in 1965 and 1967, me and Grant Rutherglen and Pam Aiken went to the juvenile championships, and they were called Canadian Juniors. In those days, sponsored by Pepsi, and we went to Thunder Bay, which was Port Arthur and Fort William. We went by train. So that's Pam Aiken from Red Mountain and Grant Rutherglen from Red Mountain, who went to the juvenile championships that these guys were in. Again, but we weren't on the BC team, but we were chosen for the BC team for that particular event. And kids from all over BC went, and we went by train, and we went to the Thunder Bay, Fort William, Port Arthur, at Mount Loch Lomond. Loch Lomond. You know the one? Okay. Sheer ice. You could see, and Pam and I were looking at the course, and we could see through the ice, and we could see the branches and the rocks and the maple leaves and stuff underneath the ice in the gate where you had to turn. So hopefully there was a rut, because you could go shh into the rut and then you catch on. But these guys skied so much better than we did in the 60s, late 60s. And then these guys skied so well in 78, 79, 80, 81, and then to move them on to. So this was a dream for me.
And go ahead, Chris.
I think
Derek.
to your question, I mean, it's tough to nail down any. There isn't any one factor why
Pinpoint.
this all happened at that time, but in my mind, it's a combination of everything. The ski hill that we skied on was so challenging, and the program that we had was amazing, really, at that time in Canada, and we all knew each other really well. We all had the same kind of interests. we'd hang out all the time. We were happy to push for whatever reason. That doesn't happen very much. I don't think anymore. But a combination of and good coaching. You know, like we had
good coaching.
We had great coaching. Like I was told the right things at the right time, and I'll never forget the day that something clicked in my head that I could be okay. You know, like it was. You know, I was a little late. Like these guys were a little quicker than I was when I was younger. But then it was one day things were clicking, and we were training on red slalom. I'll never forget this as long as I lived. And I finished my training run, and you looked at me and you said, "You ski like that at the race this weekend, you will win." And I went, "Oh, okay." And that was the first time I think it dawned on me that maybe I could be on a podium or something.
Yeah.
And sure enough, I'm just going to ski like that. And I did, and I won. It was just that simple.
The biggest sort of click, as you call it, I remember was Brian when we were practicing for I guess we were trying to qualify for the high school ski team.
Oh.
And I remember I was out there, and no offense to Brian, he wasn't doing as well as the rest of us until that weekend. And Derek, Chris, and I are just going, "What the heck's going on here? How did he beat us?" And in every single run, and we were like, "I don't know what's wrong. Something's wrong here. Who's doing the timing here? There's no way he's beating us."
Is that in Fernie?
No, it was here.
Oh, here.
Then we went to Fernie after we were on the high school team. Yeah. But we were all
the race was in Fernie.
Yeah, but the practice to get on to join the team, we had to qualify.
Gosh, it was hard to get to that point
was
where I
like-
could actually beat you guys, though.
Oh, yeah.
It was like literally the weekend before. Brian was in normal spot. That weekend, he beat us all, and we were like, "What's going on? Something's not right."
Yeah. And unfortunately, you came second, third, fourth instead of Brian was first now.
It was interesting.
But still, I remember that I wanting to be as good as you guys so bad. It was like this big motivator my whole life. So
A big difference back then compared to now, though, is there was no snowboarding, no free ski competition.
Yes.
It was there was freestyle skiing, which wasn't actually done here at all. You know, like moguls and aerials and that. So it was alpine skiing, or you just skied on the hill. And so as far as a group of kids interested in doing things, if you wanted to get into competition, that's what you got into.
I think that's really
And there was quite a history of it in the past, as we were saying. It was not uncommon to know that an Olympic gold medalist grew up in your town, and some of us would have known her. And then, so it wasn't a far stretch to get there. And I think, like Derek was saying, the organization within the Red Mountain Racers and all our parents helping out made it really good. And we had parents involved in that had been involved on a world stage previous to that. So everything was sort of achievable, and our parents said it was achievable, so we were able to keep going that way, which was.
But the hand-me-down stuff from one era to the next, like for Bill Stevens, he had the experience. His dad coached me for a very short time once, when we didn't have a coach one year, and it was a BC Cup type race at Big White, and it was set on the flats. And I remember going down with your dad and kind of memorizing the course, and it was close, 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 close. I went, "What the heck's that going on there?" And Bill said to me, "You know, you can figure this out and you can win this race." Which, you know what I mean? Like I said it to Derek, who watched him ski, and then Bill, with his experience, just said, "You can win this. You know, everybody else will be turning. You can go straight through there." You know, that kind of stuff. So for Bill's handing down his knowledge to me, I'm handing down my knowledge to you guys. And then when these guys came, it became really special because there were so many. Like when I was there, it was Pam Aiken and myself, and then Gary after a year or two after. But to have 4 or 5 and 6 guys, and add Dee Dee and Stan and Felix, to have that many succeed so well in such a short period, 4 or 5 year period that they came up, I was overwhelmed as a coach. I was going, "Wow, I hit the jackpot." I'm here at the right time, the right place at the right time.
There was that picture where we all had our Pontiac Cup jackets on, and there was, I think, 15 of us,
Yeah.
and 9 made the national ski team from that group.
So that was, I took that one and ran with it to guys like Wertel and everything else. I said, yeah, but I had 9 guys out of 12 made the national team.
But Nancy, I mean, my first pair of downhill skis were a pair of her skis. That there was like a pool of skis that you could use, and it was an old pair of skis of hers, but
Rosino.
yeah, Roswell's. And then she came to our award ceremony. Remember that year?
Yeah.
Our banquet, she came and gave out the medals. So it was real that you could do well, and I think it really made a big difference for us, anyways.
Yeah.
Can I go back to your school thing? And at what age were you like just missing school and going skiing instead? And did your parents know about it?
Yeah, no, they did. I mean, we pretty much by the time we were 12 or 13, we were skiing a lot, and we missed big chunks. By the time we were 15, we weren't really going to school much.
Was this training, or was this just like
Racing,
we're on
racing
our way?
training.
Well,
Yes.
we'll travel 2 races.
Yeah.
So if we had a GS and a slalom in Jasper, we would have to leave on a Wednesday to drive all the way, and then the Thursday you'd get your orientation to the mountain, and then the first race would happen, and the next race would happen, and then Sunday after the final race or whatever, you start to head back. So that means you can miss Monday too. So you could be 3 days a week.
Yeah, and the
Out of
other
school.
thing I think was unique is that we all graduated high school in our year, the right year.
Barely.
I'm not sure we had all the right classes, but we did. And our school, like a lot of kids in Vancouver, they had to quit school basically, or take private school, and we didn't. We were still public. There wasn't a program here, and again, that made a big difference to us too.
Yeah, the teachers are really good because we used to have to, if we were going away, we had to bring a form for each teacher in each class to sign so they acknowledged we were going to be gone for that week and had given us homework, which I don't know if it got done or not. But
Well, Grant used to sit us down. I mean, I remember when we went to Mount Hood, we would sit down and do homework after skiing in the afternoon. Remember, for a couple hours.
But the beauty of that was Kenny would help them with their schoolwork.
That's true.
His brother
yeah,
Ken
did well in
Stevens
school.
did
Yeah.
really well in school.
He got me through high school.
But he was good enough at his own schoolwork that he's going to be part of the team. So who would the team go to if they need a little help with their schoolwork? Oh, yeah, we got Kenny. I don't know how Kelly did. in
Kelly
high
was
school.
quite
That was good. Yeah.
Kelly was good, and so and then I mean, you guys got straight A's all the time, most of the time.
I'm not going to say that, Grant.
No, but they got good marks. They got good marks in
It was
school.
Kelly.
Kelly Lee is
Kelly Lee.
is
So Karen-
Terry
Karen.
Lee's daughter.
Karen's
Karen's
Yes.
the older sister,
Yes.
who paved the way for Karen. And Kelly was a girl on the team of 6 guys, or 8 guys.
And their dad was very involved in them.
And Terry
as
was
well.
my director after Bill Stevens. Then Terry Lee became the director, chairman, what were they called? President.
President of the ski club.
Red Mountain Racers president was Bill Stevens when I started, and Terry Lee for the success years.
So this was the Red Mountain Racers that you were leaving school with to
Yeah.
travel.
Yeah.
Yes.
Adventure.
So we all made the BC ski team, but kind of late, relatively compared to the other kids that were there.
Well, the next year they were a lot younger, but I think we were fairly.
But like Glenn Dory was there a couple of years before us.
Yeah.
Even then he wasn't.
Yeah.
But
Well,
He
there-
was older than we are too, by
yeah, I
a
know.
year.
But they were. I mean, I think we were, at least in my opinion, I think we were a little bit late.
We were, and correct me if I'm wrong, Grant. Maybe you know this, but weren't we kind of wanted on the BC team a year before we? Didn't our parents kind of say? I thought our parents kind of held us back in Rossland for a year.
Well, Wertel was asking me.
Right.
I want those guys, and I said, you can't have them yet.
But I think that helped us too, is that we stayed together
That's
as a group and got through school and trained together, and we're a little bit more mature when we went there.
I think so.
Because in ski racing, and probably like many things, you can be almost good enough. And I knew so many guys that were almost good enough, or as good, but they got a broken leg at the wrong time,
Yeah.
or they, you know, did something wrong and they're gone. You know, like, and we were stuck together as a group, and it helped a lot, I think.
Yeah.
But the thing that impressed Glenn Wertel when they did make it was how disciplined they were, how hard they worked, and how fit they were. But those things were more prominent as a Red Mountain racer in those last couple of years, because now we got a mature group of young men that I wanted much higher fitness than when they started.
You built it up.
Yeah, and pretty soon they're doing it. So that's where I sort of became looking around in a circle of 6-footers that these guys can do it on their own now. They know.
Actually, that first year we went to the juvenile championships, John Ritchie was one of the coaches.
Yeah.
He ended up coaching the national ski team with the Crazy Canucks. So our first year with the national team, he was our coach again. So
Yeah.
we kind of knew, you always knew someone there. And there was always someone on the team, as I was saying before, there was someone on the team that we knew as kids, always. And same when people came after us.
So how old were you when you did make it to the when you did move on to the BC team?
82?
Just after high school.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we were 17, 18,
17,
Yeah.
18.
Yeah.
Because we were a national team.
and then we were on the national team by 20, 19? 19, yeah. And
So
Brian
we-
was a year before us.
But did you guys all have 2 years with the BC team?
Yeah.
Not Brian.
No.
Brian only had one.
No, I have 2 years with the BC team.
He was the year before us.
Me and
The year
Felix
before
and
us,
Kelly
right,
went
right.
on to the team
First.
Right. And
Then you guys
I was
went
so
on.
excited when we went down to Mount Hood and we did training runs, and all you guys got on with me, and that was a phenomenal year. And then right after that year, I went on to the national ski team, and you guys came up. I think. Well, I know Derek and Chris were there. You guys
Yeah.
were with me training that summer.
guys
We
were
trained, but we weren't good enough to make
in
it.
hair tucks and everything else. And then Stan got sent
Hansen.
because of Jim Haight. Jim Haight said Stan Hansen has good enough points; he should be there too. And then Stan came over and competed for training runs. We had to compete to officially be on the team right at the beginning of the season, or you would start in January. And Stan came along and beat every single person. Ken Reed, Steve Podborski, Todd Brooker, every one of us. And I placed somewhere in the middle, but they decided that I would stay back until January, and I went over in January, and then I fell. I went to one World Cup, and then fell in Morzine. That was it.
Bruce Henry was there.
Yeah. But I mean, the community was so strong, and Jim Haight, who I'm sure you've heard of, really was instrumental. I mean,
Well, he was
really
the BC Alpine director.
Yeah, but he
Yeah.
did a lot.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. When I was
Yeah, he did a
15,
lot.
the Canadian Championships were on in Whistler, I think, the downhill. And we had so many good skiers in mostly from Rossland, but in BC.
BC.
Like I was
Yeah.
not that good, so I didn't qualify. But I was much better than all the other kids across the country who were qualified. And so Jim said, this is not fair. BC should have a bigger quota. And
Exactly.
if you don't give us a bigger quota, none of the national team guys from BC are going to race, including Dave Murray.
Wow.
And he honestly said that, and I don't think they were going to race if I didn't get it, and they let me in.
That was Jim Haight, though.
Yeah, it was Jim
He
Haight.
could bluff.
Jim, I mean,
From
it
here
was-
to Quebec, he could bluff.
But again, that helped the Red Mountain racers. I mean,
Agreed.
it really was
Well,
a strong.
As the
presence.
BC Alpine director, he did pull a lot for us local kids
Yeah.
here.
Oh, for sure.
He was in a position where he could
Did a lot
influence
for us, I think.
And,
For me,
and, and for me as a coach too,
Yeah.
because I'd go into Jim Haight's physics class in Trail High School, and I'd say, okay, I'm here for my quota. Here's all my kids' names. Peter Bosinger, yeah, he's on there. He's going. And then Jim Haight would say, okay, they're all going.
Yeah.
And Paul Venner, who was a friend of mine, coach up in Prince George, he'd say, what the hell are you doing? How do you get all these guys in the race?
They're good.
Go and see Jim Haight. No, you're right.
We did have
Huge influence on our programs. And his wife, Rosemary, too. Because she was the zone chairman, he was BC chairman. We had it covered.
No, it was a very political sport. Still is, I think.
Oh, for
Yeah,
sure.
golf sport is.
It was
Yeah.
a little more cowboy back then, though,
Yeah.
than it is now. You couldn't get
You would
away
know.
with
Yeah.
quite the things.
No, Jim Haight was a
And,
cowboy.
yeah, I think Jim behind the scenes did a lot more than we'll ever know.
Yeah, and Terry Lee was a little more straight, honest. Like he'd say at a banquet, Terry Lee would say, and we'd like to thank Kamiko he worked for Kamiko, and we'd like to thank Kamiko for all they don't know they donated.
Including the chairlift years ago.
to run the races. Kamiko would donate. Like it's tech. It's called tech now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, that was one remark that Terry Lee made as our president was, we'd like to thank Kamiko for all the stuff that they don't know they gave us. So, I mean, it was a total family thing
Yeah.
from way back.
The other thing about that was the Kamiko itself it was the head office at the time, right? Am I correct? It was head office.
Vancouver's head
No.
office.
Well, Vancouver was
Yeah.
even by that point.
Yeah.
But there was very senior people in
Yeah,
Toronto,
no.
right? Like Terry
That's all they
Lee
had.
was
But Bill Stevens was an
Bill
engineer
Stevens,
for Kamiko, and Terry Lee was
your dad.
engineer for
Your dad
Kamiko.
was there, right?
Chris McIver's dad was at Kamiko.
Yeah. So we had all these.
Dave was in the school system.
So we had all these successful parents that were then injecting that skill into the programs, the way I saw it anyways.
Yeah.
You were talking about training on War Eagle. Can you talk about that?
I'm sure for some of the locals might find it interesting, but we did when downhill became a thing. We realized that we were pretty good at it as a group, and the coaches. We started training downhill on the War Eagle, and I mean, as I've coached recently, and for me, looking at that run, thinking that we actually skied downhill down there just blows my mind, because that would never ever happen today. And we would go down there basically as fast as we could with no netting whatsoever, no
There's
protection.
one little
I
piece.
think there's one little, sort of
One
a
little
crowd
piece.
At the bottom
control
of the traverse.
fencing on the one
And
corner.
there was one person, Jimmy Haight, would stand up and where you'd leave the start and you go by him and then he could see you come out the finish, and that was it for
Yeah,
course control.
but there was wasn't many turns, just a couple.
Yeah.
And then on the bottom was pretty much straight. And I just again, another thing that I'll never forget is crashing at the bottom and tumbling
The transition.
and along the side of the trees and coming to a stop, with a big tree right beside you. We just thought that was kind of what you did,
We were probably
It was
8
okay.
or 9 or 10 when we first did that.
But yeah, and Brian, I think, yeah, you're right. Like we would go up there and we would do 10, 12 runs a day of
Yep.
downhill training,
Yeah.
which
Think about what we were learning.
that just doesn't exist anymore.
It was
So
a 9-minute ride up the lift and 42 seconds down the down.
yeah.
Yeah. And we just loved it.
So if you got 10 runs, you had 104, well, whatever.
Now-
you do the math, Chris.
I had my dad's 210 Kessleys on, I remember. That's what I would.
We did a long time before that though too, because we were like 8.
I think we were younger than 8 when we
We
first
might have been,
or
because
at
I
least-
remember falling and breaking the safety strap on my skis, and then I couldn't get on the chairlift to go up again, and I had to go up into the bar to get my parents to fix my safety straps.
Oh,
So it was, and I had my old
Yeah, we were
K2s that
young.
were like 160s at the time.
we left our safety straps on back then because
You couldn't get on the lift without them.
I fell on what did we call it, airplane corner or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the ski whipped and hit me in the thigh so hard that I couldn't ski the rest of that day. And Grant Smith was the guy that took me off the course.
Where was Airplane Corner?
Right about where Tower. So you used to start up about equivalent of Tower 12 in War Eagle. So there's sort of a mine shaft there in the summertime, right up above that place, and we'd start there, come down the side hill, and then where you come out to the chairlift at Tower 10, there was a big turn there, and then another sort of a left turn, and it was almost just followed the run from there down. So it wasn't very long, but
So it was about Tower 12, straight in. We had a flat spot to put the gate, then it was a total traverse, side hill.
Yeah.
And then I took Lauren McDermott's cat up there in the summer, and I made that big turn, and I plowed dirt and put dirt and made it a bank corner. So that was the big
That was
turn.
airplane.
Yeah,
Wasn't it?
that was the big turn at Tower 10. And then you went traversed across again, and then you dropped down the hill and made a hard left, and again you could go across a catwalk. Then you had to turn down, and that was your last
Terrible picture, but
Then it was the
Oh yeah,
big
that's
bump,
Yeah.
and then the pre-jump over the road, and then you had to push forward before the transition, otherwise you'd rip the cheeks right off you with the. Remember that was the, what do you call that?
Compression.
Yeah. Well, no. What was that called?
G-forces?
G-forces. So your G-forces at maybe 60 miles an hour down through the transition, you had to reach forward and stay on your skis. And I remember these guys saying, "Holy man!" And just went, because if you went back, your tips would go up and your ass would be on the ground.
But again, it was unique. Nobody else was doing that.
Exactly.
Maybe Kimberly would do a bit of that.
Oh, we used to
So
race
other
downhill in
teams.
Selma too.
Yeah.
And I think that really led to a lot of success amongst this group, especially you guys, with downhill. Because we were skiing downhill every day.
Yeah.
Even when we were free skiing, like we'd have the afternoon off on
Yeah.
a Sunday, we'd get our downhill skis on
Yeah.
and we'd go to the top of Granite and we would just go as fast as we possibly could, and we were allowed to do that. And I think that made a huge difference for all of us.
If you remember-
It was a very unique thing.
Yeah, that was that transition
there's
down.
a picture here that people can't obviously hear that are listening, but the point of that picture, it's a terrible picture, but how scary and steep that War Eagle was.
And
I think
straight.
the scariest part was the helmets we had to wear, because remember we were back then no one wore helmet skiing, we wore toques, and
Right.
you only wore a helmet if you were in downhill racing. And when we were 8 or so, we'd go in and there was a supply of helmets in the race office. And we'd grab helmets, and if you're lucky, you got one that fit, and if you didn't, you got like a motorcycle helmet. And as you went down, the thing is moving your goggles around on your head to add a little challenge.
My head was so big that I wore my motorcycle helmet, and the motorcycle helmet was heavier than
Yeah,
Oh, I remember
So
that.
motorcycle helmet,
Remember
yeah.
his
Yeah.
helmet had to
Yeah.
be big.
Captain Canada.
Yep, Captain Canada, purple ski
You
helmet.
had the best suit though. Your mom made the best suit.
Whose idea was the War Eagle?
I think it was Jim Hayes.
Okay,
Like before we were around.
so that was happening. There was
It was already, the
A
run was
legacy
cut
of
when we were
nice.
very, very young.
Yeah.
Like Gary Aiken and those guys would be training.
Yeah.
I remember it just, honestly, I think I was like 7 or 8, and they said, just go down. I crashed in the first corner, and like, that's kind of what you did back then. But they were doing it, and then we just got it bigger,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, because Gary and I trained on it,
Yeah.
and we used to do it at Christmas camps, which I ended up making for you guys.
But didn't you?
But I went down there as a skiing it with John Platt. So whatever year that was,
Yeah.
mid '60s, we were actually skiing it then. But the training that I gave for you guys was really official in that we had full on flags, red both sides,
Right.
and we had corners and we had side slipping going on, and we had it fixed up, and we had some parents were helping.
Didn't you bring a
But
cat in or something?
In the summer, yeah.
In the
it's
summer, and
it's in the book here.
yeah.
And that I was able to use Lauren's cat, and I wanted the corner, that big airplane corner, to be one bank, long corner. And that was where you're right, you learned to make a big, long arc. That was before Super G even started, and we were making those big, long arcs, which was hard for you guys to suddenly say, okay, I'm going to stay in my tuck as long as I can, and I'm going to make this turn. So yeah, it became a Christmas camp thing with us and these guys long after it was already used. And then, of course, we had Fred Bosinger for Peter and Robbie Bosinger's father for a manager, and I'd say, I'd like to have the War Eagle for a week. Can I do that? And he'd say, no problem. So again, like Derek said, this is unique. Like Chris said, it's a unique area, because who else would get, as a coach, Paul Venner or Glenn Mertel for that matter, any of these other coaches would get a whole ski run to train for a week at Christmas, so that you could get 10 runs of 42-second downhills and just get back on the chairlift and go up and around and around and around.
So to answer your question about downhillers, I think when I look at these guys, the most well-rounded, like could ski everything, but it was also a time where speed gave you more opportunity, because we had the crazy Canucks, and if you wanted to make it, unfortunately the technical side wasn't as well supported, but Didn't you go on the team as a technical racer?
Well, I
Racing.
qualified for the team on my downhill results, believe it or not. But I was on the tech team. I was back and forth. With
But you were almost all tech team, weren't you?
at the end, yeah.
Yeah,
I stayed
yeah.
with the tech team.
And then
Yeah,
Chris,
you're with
you
them.
I started in the tech team, but I wasn't good enough, so I went to the downhill team. But the Europeans had a big advantage on us. Like they were ahead of us on the tech side,
Oh yeah.
and downhill was where we were a little more even. I mean, they were
Yeah.
ahead of us, or me anyways, but it was just a little easier to compete in the downhill for us. So
Well, Dave Murray and Reed and Dave Irwin and those guys kind of paved the way in early 70s, 75, 74.
mid-70s, yeah.
Mid 70s, they kind of paved the way for the rest of these guys. But you're right, the War Eagle downhill training helped these guys. They basically would overcome the fear part, and the speed wasn't an issue for them. So if you ski fast down granite or red consistently on a weekly basis, you do tend to get pretty confident, and I think that's where.
But I think as far as the racing goes, like it wasn't just a lot of kids in BC and Alberta would be allowed to race downhill at that age. It wasn't like we were the only ones because we would race with them, and it's just I think the area was kind of interesting. I've got an interesting story I'll tell you. You can delete it if you want later because it's not really about us, but. So my wife grew up in Banff, and she always thought the Lone Pine run on Norquay was the toughest run in the world. And so,
Steep.
yeah, so when she brought, our kids grew up skiing here, and she brought Arlo and Roan over to ski in Banff, and she was, well, watch out when you get up to Lone Pine, it's going to be so steep. If you're scared, I'll take you down another way, all that. And both our kids got off the chairlift, and they were only like about 6 or 7, and they go, where's the steep part, Mom? So it's just a story to kind of tell you that, the area here was quite a bit more advanced. And I think that's what really, like not just, you had the organization, you had the coaching, you also had an area that really not only was helpful and let us go wherever we wanted to train, but it was also, the train was quite difficult. And that really added to us, like when we got to different various races, I mean, the only race I was probably scared at and still am would be Kitzbühel. But all the rest were within your ability.
let's not forget about the granite downhill guys too.
Yeah, well, I mean you work your way up, and you work your way up. Like we started racing downhill and everything. We were, like I said, 8 or younger, and all the way up. And then we got more formal races. We went to a lot of NORAM races all over North America, and by the time we got over to Europe, it was. I mean, there's always something challenging. I mean, jump the camel bumps first time was a bit of a, oh crap, gotta do this now. But it was all doable.
So the granite downhill started right at the very top of the mountain. Like if you go down to, as if you're going to ski down the main run, right? There was a little shack there that they use for guests now. That was our start shack.
Yeah, we built that.
And we would go straight down that ridge, one turn down into the bowl, straight into the bowl, and then there was like an Indy 500 turn that went around where there's a tower now. And the forces, there were lots of racers that couldn't handle the coming into the bowl at that speed. They didn't have the ability to hold themselves up, and they'd ride around that turn on their back.
So these guys had G-force experience.
And then we would ski down a little bit further, do a few back and forths, and then we'd go right from the top into the flats, right straight down there. And I think Stan was recorded at 92 miles an hour back then, in miles per hour.
93,
or maybe 93 miles an hour. And by that point, Grant had mentioned it was about 2 minutes and 10 seconds, I think, is something around it.
2:20.
It's a lot faster.
So
2:02, wasn't it?
No, it was 145, 148.
Oh, in the end, when I went, it was 2:02.
no, I got some times here. I'm pretty sure that when Bill Johnson was there.
Yeah.
Anyways, by the bottom, your legs were so tired. I don't know if you guys, maybe it was just me, but I remember my legs being so dead, and there was the one last drop off that you're wondering how you're going to make it down this last section, and you were just shaking by the time you went through that finish gate. So we were learning I don't know if you would call it a World Cup level course, but we were learning on a course that was teaching us so much.
That had a lot of elements in it of any kind of World Cup.
I think to clarify though, I think Brian's right. We used to turn and go straight down there,
Indian
but
Flats.
right now, where if you go on the hill now, there's where you cross over the main run coming from Silverlode. That was all smooth through there. It wasn't a big bump.
Yes.
There wasn't a road there. Because you would not go into that at 90 miles an hour very successfully.
The only time it was 85, 86, and then 90 for you guys was that last pitch
Yeah.
before the rollers.
Yeah.
So the pitch going down was the highest speed because they clocked us at 85. And we did it in many years before you did. But 85 was fast enough because we had Aztec and
Aspen.
in Aspen.
Aztecs and Aspen, yeah.
Yeah, and that was 85.
Before we leave the Granite Downhill story, the thing I remember is that Chris, I think, fell going down that slope,
Yeah.
right? I think you were the
At
only
top
one
speed.
at top speed.
It was the first time my father had ever watched me ski at anything. I crashed right in
First
front
and
of
last.
him. And
Did you blow
then-
up? Everything came
so
off?
we were a team. We were on the BC ski team then, and I had this great pair of skis. Like all these skis make a bit of difference, and so we would use them. Guys behind me would use the same skis. So our friend Stuart Garens was
Yeah.
waiting, and I broke them right in half.
Not just the ski, you broke the metal binding in half
the
too.
whole thing, yeah, like-
where
That was a fast crash.
I remember you saying I think you burned yourself.
Yeah,
Like,
you were sliding on
you
it.
slid it was so fast, you were sliding so far.
Yeah.
Your downhill suit was fireproof, eh?
and Stu was at the top, just upset like you wouldn't believe. Where did he get up here with my skis? Because he had to run and they're
He didn't
not
do that
coming
well.
up. You gotta use something else.
Yeah, no, but we used to share all kinds of stuff like that
Yeah.
back then. So
Yeah.
yeah, it
What,
was-
what was the experience like coming back into Rossland to like do a hometown race once you're at the higher levels of team?
You know.
Canadian Championships?
yeah.
Well, yeah, we did a lot, but actually, Chris and I used to, because Chris and I were on the downhill team, so our schedule was different than Derek's, and we used to come back and we would just join in and say, "Hey, can we train with you guys?" And we go train because we
Yeah.
really had was it Bernd Mueller, and he'd set a slalom course down the moguls down the cliff, and we'd go, "All right, let's give it a try, see how far we get," and it was a lot of fun back then.
Yeah, because we would always come back at Christmas,
Yeah.
and then kind of at the end of the year, we'd be skiing for a couple weeks in each time, and it was fun. It was it was nice.
But we would just join in with the local
Yeah.
racers and train with them at times, and then we go to we'd race in the springtime all around too.
Yeah,
And there were a bunch of kids that I think learned from, especially when you guys were coming back. By that time, I was gone, but there was other kids that came along. Robbie Bosinger,
Yeah.
Peter Bosinger,
Peter Bosinger.
you know,
Yeah.
I mean,
Karen.
They all benefited from you guys coming back and showing that, you know, local kids could do it. I have to say, skiing with Don, like Chris was already saying, is to this day is quite the experience. Beautiful. His dad was a beautiful skier. Don has carried that beautiful skiing capabilities to a whole new level, and yeah, it's really fun.
To save energy if you don't turn.
He turns, practices all the time. He hasn't forgot a thing from his Grant's coaching, and all the other coaches, like you're going down trails, he's always working on
Complete
the
the turn, always.
He's maximizing his efficiency still, though all that coaching is still there.
When you guys were 8, 9, were you thinking competition, skiing is the thing I'm going to do, or were you just in it? Were you just skiing for fun, skiing in competition with each other, training in competition with each other? Was there a goal? Was there a vision of where you were going to go, or were you just living it?
At 8 or 9 years old.
Or even younger? Yeah, when you were doing the circuit training on the
No, they were 12.
At Drake's.
When he did this cross-bonata and the
promenade.
circuit training in the gym,
Yeah, we were older.
they were 12, 13.
Okay, when you were 12, 13. Was there a goal? Were you set up that time to aim for ski racing, or were you just 4 guys in competition with each other, doing what you loved?
I remember feeling like the top levels were so far away when I was that age.
I think it was just fun.
Yeah.
It wasn't high pressure. We weren't going anywhere. I mean, didn't really ever think we'd make the ski. I mean, Don a bit different because of his father, but I thought we were just having fun. And even when we were 12, 13, I didn't really think we'd do much. I mean, I don't know.
I didn't start saying,
high school.
I didn't start saying things like, if I can do it, you guys can do it. I remember saying that to you a lot, latterly. So when you were more like 14, 15, 16, and we were doing serious cross promenade training, serious dryland, and really getting into some results in racing, I think I said to you guys can do this. You can be on the national team.
Right.
But before that, when you were 8, 9, and 10, no, they were
Yeah, we were just having
they
fun
were just
at that age.
skiing.
So I may be a little different here, but I have a story about you too, Chris, about this. But when I always have stories about you.
Yeah, you do have a good story.
They're all going to be good ones.
Not all good for podcasts.
The majority aren't, but anyway. No, when I was young, because my dad had coached Nancy Green, and she'd come to our house for dinner a couple times, but we had a couple of the Demorier bibs from the first World Cup here. And they'd be in our house, and somehow we had a stopwatch, and my brother and I used to put them on. So we were 6 or 7 or young, and we would run down our stairs, because we had 3 floors in our stairs, and time each other wearing the bibs. And so, but so we were kind of, and I'd always thought, oh yeah, we're going to go to the Olympics, we're going to do this. But I think when we were skiing, we were just skiing. It wasn't, you weren't thinking as skiing going to the Olympics. But I do remember Chris, and I don't know if you remember this, he'd come over to my place, and we were young. We were probably in our teens at that time, and he'd go to my dad and start asking him what it's like to be on the national team. I'd go, would you shut up and quit talking to him? We got to go do something. Like, he doesn't know anything.
Well, so yeah, he had the medals. He had some medals,
Yeah.
and he'd been to Europe. I thought it was super cool, and we just talked.
So to say that we were just in there fun. No, you had to, but you always wanted to be a soccer player too.
Hockey, you played hockey.
Only 1 year, so
Yeah.
I did miss 1 year when I played hockey.
That's right.
And I wasn't very good at that either, so I had to go back.
You broke your thumb or something.
You were good at soccer though.
Oh yeah, well, not good enough apparently. So
But
That was all
at the
good.
big
Didn't have a
soccer
lot-
game in Mount Hood, remember? We
Yeah.
had soccer in the afternoon.
yeah, it was
Didn't have a lot
These
of
guys were
competition
good
in
athletes
soccer.
too.
But no, it was a great experience.
But I think, that kind of goes, maybe we weren't thinking, oh, we're going to do this, but there was probably some thoughts in our minds. But I know when we were skiing, it was all about just skiing. Because it wasn't just,
It was
you went
bad.
and train gates, then we would go
Back
free
in the
skiing a lot. A ton of skiing.
And it was sort of progressive. It was sort of like, win the Nancy Green race. Then it was win a BC Cup. Then it's win a Pontiac Cup. And then it's win, a national championship or whatever. It was sort of like you always had another goal, and they all kind of led to the opportunities that we all got, which was, pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
And then even when we were just making the national team, we would go to the trail gym, and Ray Ferrero was making his hockey career, and he'd be in the gym with us, and all these young skinny guys, were just working out. It was very cool. Mm-hmm. We would go down.
We used to compare our training programs with Ray all the time.
Yeah. He had a better career than us.
Yeah, he did. Not better. Longer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Much more lucrative.
Much more.
Still going too.
Yeah.
Yeah, he just got a new job, didn't he?
Yeah. Many times I'd fly out of Castlegar on national team trips, and I'd be on the plane with Ray, and we'd sit beside each other and
nice.
chat about our.
Ray Ferrero was
Our
on
stuff.
the National Hockey League from trail.
Yeah, there was a few National Hockey League guys around. I remember when we did Hanson's, I think next door there would be a bunch of them too. Do you guys remember that? There was a cabin next door, and I can't even remember who the athletes were, but yeah. It was a very competitive area at the time.
Yeah.
Well, who was it always came up to Valgardena?
For the race?
Yeah, he was.
Hockey
He
player.
played hockey in Bolzano. He was on the Edmonton Oilers for a while. Then he came over. He was over there.
Tambolini?
No, it wasn't Tavolini.
Oh,
Was he from Rossland or
Trail.
yeah.
Anyway, he would know we were there. Come up, see us up at the race, and then he'd send a goalie, a third string goalie from the Bolzano team, so we could shoot pucks at him. When we were,
So after you retired, I guess, some of you were coaching, and I know you were on the ski, the racers sort of board. Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. So how did sort of the future steps and like the legacy continue? Like how did you see that that stopped playing out
So-
contributed?
So interesting things that happened was when I moved back to Rossland in 1997. So I had 2 boys, and I had dreams of replicating what we had done, the experience that we had lived through. So yeah, I got involved in the board, and then somewhere in there, Donald joined me too, and then we started working on like a training area. But the other thing too we worked on was to create a ski academy. And it was specifically, we've talked a bit about this, is the fact that education was a real challenge for these athletes. And so we created a ski academy so that, and the kid would learn online in a single classroom grade, I believe the original class was grade 6 to 12 in the same room with a teacher that would guide everything, and they would have, because they were doing this online, they could watch it on their screens. They would have all this analysis of what kids were falling behind, and then would focus on the kids that needed help. And then they would focus on in the fall, they would get half their season done before the season, and then they would have the whole ski season to be on the road doing whatever they wanted from a very young age, and then they would have to finish in the spring. And so they would have it all figured out. So essentially they were going to school half the time. And what was so impressive to me with that program was many of the kids were on honor roll. And some of them are very successful today, the kids that we were involved with from that program. They learned how to learn online and be more independent. We did have a lot of resistance from the teachers. They didn't like this new teaching model. And eventually the school district pushed it out, and the reason they pushed it out was because they were trying to shut down the Rossland High School, just turn it into grade 9. So there was a lot of tension in those days, and we've got some articles of the efforts at that time that we were making, but that's part of the reason that we started the ski academy. And then that moved into Seven Summits, like the Seven Summits School is that today. And along the way, we included snowboarding, we included dance, we included all kinds, even to the point where we now have kids that are doing, becoming programmers, like computer programmers, all kinds of skills where they can focus on their passion while they're going through school. And yeah, I'm really excited that we did that. So, yeah.
I think everyone's career ends at a different time. And unfortunately, it's often due to injury.
Yeah.
And if it's not injury, it's performance that you're not happy with.
Right.
So
Right.
none of us, we all ended at a different time and started other things
Yes.
at different times. You know, unfortunately, Brian was the first one to get injured out. I think, Derek, you were the next one.
I think Chris
You
and I were
were
same
the
year.
same year.
Were you guys
Yeah.
off the same year?
Yeah.
What years?
That would have been 87.
87.
Was it 87?
87,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so I was gone January 83. I didn't know it was the end of my career, but yeah, broken femur. This is all the surgeries, multiple surgeries.
Yeah, they can't see it on the podcast.
Yeah, sure. Anyways, well, the back then they could only do traction. For my injury, they decided, there was other things they could do, but they decided, I just read the report, they said the bones was such a mess that they could only do traction. So they put me in traction for 6 weeks. I couldn't leave the bed, and then it's just this force pulling your leg, and then every day they would come in and they'd reassemble the bones. They would take an X-ray and then push it, take more X-rays and push it until they thought they had something that looked like a bone. And so obviously even by the end of this, there was no way I was going back, even though I dreamed that we were going back. And I went back training with these guys, and before I went training, I got back to trail, and the doctor in trail, Dr. Hainsworth, said, no, we need to redo it. We're going to put a rod into the middle of his leg. So they drilled a rod from the top down, and they cut the bone apart, and they tried to lengthen it, and they tried to rotate it. And then I went to the gym with these guys, and of course they were training, 300 or so pound squats. And so I tried to do that too, and my leg bent. The rod had actually literally bent in my leg. So I have the rods. We can put them into the museum if you want. And so then the doctor had to figure out how to remove the rod through a good healthy upper bone now, without shattering it. And he had perspiration on his head when he saw the X-ray.
He's sweating steel rods.
Anyways, that was the end of my career. and these guys were so supportive and around me a lot and everything. We obviously they were off on their other careers, but I have to say everything that these guys did and Grant's coaching and everything else set me for my career, and I wanted to do something really exciting with the rest of my life. I didn't know what that was going to be, but it helped me, and I have to say I wasn't the feeling of going into a normal life was hard, but at the same time the whole sport and all my friends helped support me through my whole career. To this day, I still use that.
Ski America card.
Yeah, that's true.
Vancouver Ski Show.
But and I'm gonna add to Brian's story of when he was in the hospital. For me, I was injured a lot too.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I broke a bone or had surgery every year for 7 years straight, from when I was 15 to 22.
Right.
And I was out 1 year with a broken ankle. I did both my ankles, and
Yeah.
Brian was in the hospital. And I had one. There was one last NORAM race at the end of the season. I've told Brian this story many times.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought I could maybe ski in this downhill race. And I thought, well, it's my last chance to try and keep going, or I'm just going to go to school or something. And in those days, we all had our quiver of skis, and Brian had it. I knew he had a really fast pair of skis in this downhill, and I didn't even want to ask him, because you don't ask guys for their fastest skis. But he wasn't going anywhere for a while.
Wasn't using them.
No.
Not today.
So I just never forget going down and asking, "Hey, Brian, I got one race. I want to try and get on the team here. Can I use your fast skis?" And he said, "Yeah, sure."
I'm so glad you could do
And
that.
that changed the course of my skiing, because those fast skis got me basically an invite to the team, and so we helped each other in ways I think that we didn't even realize.
Yeah.
So.
And then you were coaching for 35 years,
Hats off to that.
right?
Yeah, I coached for the rest of my until now.
Yeah.
Where were you coaching?
I started coaching in. I went to school in Vancouver for a while, so I started coaching at Grouse just part time, and then I moved to Kelowna, and actually I coached there for the rest of my coaching career.
The impact you had on kids' lives, Derek, is amazing.
I haven't had any teams like this.
But yeah,
But,
I was pretty lucky.
yeah. But still, even my son Steven ski raced, and Derek would end up being kind of the coach that knew who he was. He'd take pictures of him, and it was had quite an influence. But you had some big successes too.
A few, I guess.
Yeah,
He was
Kelsey Surwa.
He was the head coach of the
Yeah.
Okanagan zone of Kelowna, Vernon, Penticton. So all those kids, even Kamloops. So he ended up, because of his success, he ended up basically being head coach of what they call a zone, Okanagan series area. And that's when they started producing kids. So he had 4 cities to choose from and 4 mountains. But it was his choice of where they trained, and it was all Derek's coaching that helped those kids.
And 30 years with all these kids, and often the parents aren't doing as good a job as they should be, and often the coach makes a huge difference in their life.
Yeah.
And I bet you saw that pattern over and over, Derek.
Somewhat, I suppose. All I know is that I'm one of the only coaches I know that didn't get fired.
He hung in there.
Very
in there.
Very competitive group of parents at that time, right? They always imagine the
Well,
politics.
that's okay. I didn't get fired.
No, I know you didn't either.
I left.
Yeah, exactly.
You're too old. So they got Gilhooly.
It's a tough sport because of the injuries that happen quite often in the falls that people have, and you go through them with everyone kind of goes through them if you go fast enough. I did.
Except you.
Yeah. Well, I did go fast enough. Yeah.
This guy never fell. Ever.
I did fall a couple times.
Oh, I don't remember when that was.
A couple of times, I would fall a couple of times in an afternoon.
Yeah, I admit I didn't go fast enough to fall. I guess
Oh,
you could
that's
say.
not true either.
But
No.
I do remember. I remember the first year out of Val d'Isere, you wrecked your knee, and
Yeah.
remember that back then you got a cast on right away,
Yeah.
and you had to map out on your
Yeah.
cast when if things were still bleeding in there.
No, I mean it's tough. It's a tough sport for
Yeah.
injuries.
It was part of it.
Yeah.
You just kind of were. You'd always. It wasn't if it was going to happen. It was when.
Yeah, and I think the other part too is financially it's a tough sport.
Yeah. Well,
You
no,
know,
it's
if you're
really bad.
like the best in Canada, you might be able to scrape a living, but barely, only with government help, quite frankly.
There's no money.
And so it was very difficult to stay in for a long time. Really, it was, it was hard. And some guys, and now they do, they stay much, much longer. I don't know how they do financially either, but we, it was kind of hard. And after a while,
Yeah.
and you gave your life up for 10 races a year once you run the national team. It was kind of like that. And if it didn't work out, that's a lot of time
Yeah.
to put aside.
Then you had to make that decision.
I think
what am I doing next?
you guys chose the right time to go though. For you, for your education, and for your job, and you for your career. And man, my hat's off to you for quitting and staying in it for 30 years coaching. But he gave back. He gave back. And for Don, there was one thing you guys forgot about with Don, and it came from Bill. Super strength.
Yeah, super strong.
Super strength.
Yeah.
So if you go back to
don't know about
Wortel days in the national team and when they were testing strength and stuff, Donald had a lot more strength. And he got it from his dad. It was
Yeah.
hereditary.
Genetics, yeah.
Bill was incredibly physically very strong naturally. And so Don got that.
Because we worked way harder than Don did.
Yeah. Of course
I
you did.
never got as strong.
Of course you did. And you got your max on your half squat.
You were
You got your
just as
max.
His legs
We were
were
all the
so
same.
long. Look how much more muscle he can fit in my little legs. I mean, it wasn't fair.
Do you remember, Chris, when we were in Zermatt and Heinz Stoll was he was a coach from Austria, was our
Yeah.
coach, and
Heinz,
they had
yeah.
this run they wanted to do up to a little monastery up this mountain the day we were leaving, and he said, okay, you got out there. Well, Chris decides to start bargaining with them and says, well, if I can do it under this time, what do I get? And it was sort of like, well, if you're gonna, because there was a guy who was a French coach that had gone there and done it, and he was some guy that raced up mountains at the time, and well, if we can beat him, what do we get? And at one point you had Stoley talked into, if you can get under 11 seconds, you never have to train again. We were in there, boy. We took
We got
off.
2 days off.
Yeah.
You and I.
We took off like crazy, and we managed to just barely beat that time. And then I remember you looking at him going, guess I don't ever train again, do I?
Yeah, no, it was fun. And I think we all did, except Brian, unfortunately. We all left when we wanted to, which I
Yeah.
think was important.
Yeah, I
It's
think it
tough
was-
when you get told to leave, and we saw that a lot.
Yeah,
And
but
at
you
least
guys,
for me, that was kind of important.
I selfishly tried to talk you into staying there a couple of times.
Yeah, yeah.
I want to tell you guys a story. I remember CBC Sports with Brian Williams,
Brian Williams. Ooh.
right? And he watched the World
Can't tell
Cup.
those stories, I just thought.
No, they don't tell those stories. But it would be like every weekend during the winter when you guys are racing World Cup, right? And I'd watch the TV, and it would be, and another Red Mountain racer, and another Red Mountain racer. He would comment about how many Red Mountain racers were there. You know, there was Felix and all you guys all starting, right? And Stan, and yeah.
yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I do
It was
remember
a fun
that.
time. And if you fell in Europe, I always had to, because we didn't have cell phones or anything, so we had to get to the post office before it closed to call our parents to let them know, because they would see it that day,
Oh,
but they wouldn't know. So it closed at 4, so you had to get down and call before 4 and let them know you're okay. I called a lot.
I know one day you didn't call though.
Oh,
Kids
kids
feel-
school? Yeah, I couldn't call then.
Oh my God! In Kitzbühel,
Yeah.
can you imagine your parents?
Oh, there's a good story there. Chris had this crash in Kitzbühel, which was really quite something. And we're in the finish at the bottom, and Kitzbühel, there's 100,000 fans there. And he comes up to me and he goes, "Hey, you going back to the hotel soon?" And I said, "Yeah, why?" And he goes, "Can you show me the way? I actually don't even know where I am right now." And I'm like, holy crap, okay, well, I'll stay with you. But getting through the crowd is also a challenge. And luckily we were not staying that far away, and we got him back to the hotel, and we were rooming
protocol
together.
was a bit different back then.
Yeah.
Yes.
Concussion protocol back then was I had to wake him up all night long to keep him awake.
That's right.
I didn't wake him up
We're allowed
once.
These guys need to describe for their listeners what Kitzbühel was, I think. I don't know if everybody will understand how significant that downhill
In a
was.
nutshell, it was quite dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was hard. It was hard.
I mean, even some of the most famous downhillers got seriously injured on that downhill course.
Well, that's where Brooker ended his career.
Brooker ended
his
Well, he
Oh,
didn't
you
end his
did?
career. Pretty
Almost
much
died.
ended everything else.
Dave
though.
Irwin was winging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That wasn't Kitzbühel, but
It was a difficult. It's every World Cup course has a difficult section in it. Kitzbühel's got all the difficult sections in it.
I would say that this is the way I explain it. There's 110 starters, usually in a World Cup race, 100-ish. At Kitzbühel, they
Yeah,
they don't come. So that goes down to about 55.
yeah,
So 40 or 45 people that would regularly race World Cup just don't show up. They won't go. And I've seen people quit racing after one run at Kitzbühel.
yeah. Remember that first year we were there? We get there and half the U.S. ski team was like, we're looking, going, "Well, you guys aren't skiing today?" "No, my knees bother me. Oh, my back's bothering." We're like, man, they all had injuries the week. But
Smart.
we started that was the first time there were 10 of us racing there, and we started the race, 10 in training runs, and only 4 of us raced the last race. Everyone else had fallen and got hurt.
you'd think they'd change Kitzbühel, but no.
It's actually, well, I won't say it. It's not the same because you can run groomers up there now.
Yeah.
So the guys will say that Bormio is the toughest one right now because it's rougher and you go through the shades a lot. So race that one.
So then, Don, back then, how did they harden the course?
So that first year we were there, they canceled the first training run, but we were allowed to go down the run. And basically what they do is the Austrian army boot packed the hill, and then they would spray it with water.
With fire hoses.
With fire hoses.
Yeah.
And then they would ski pack it and let it freeze. And it was as icy as a skating rink, but really rough. And you just kind of hope to get down, basically. The start gate's hard.
If it's smooth and icy, your edge can touch most of the snow, but if it's rough, then the edges don't touch for more than a half an inch or so. So you don't have an edge
Yeah.
because it's not in the snow. It's
I went there with my wife this winter just to watch races.
Your wife, Stephanie Robinson.
Yes, my wife Stephanie Robinson. And so we remember getting up to the top, and I looked over at the start gate, and I went, "Holy cow, that's steeper than I remember." And normally you go somewhere and you talk it up about how steep, and you get there and go, "Damn, it doesn't look as steep as it used to be." This one was, "Oh, that's steeper than I remember." And she looked and she said, "Why would your parents let you go down here?"
Well, my favorite story about that is one of the guys in the Canadian team, Chris Kent, was in the start gate, and it was a training run. And the Austrian guys go, 1, 5, like just counting down. And Chris looks over and it's foggy. You can't even see down the hill. And he goes, would you send your child down here? He said, "No, but you're not my child."
typical Chris Kent.
I want to show a picture of these guys. Okay, so Chris, Karen Lee, Derek, Donald, and Felix Belchek, World Championships. That's my favorite photo of all
Yeah.
time, I
That's
think.
1985. I was in Bormio. I was there, of course, too. Oof.
But the point is, World Championships, all you guys are there.
It was fun.
But that's interesting that commentator said another Red Mountain racer, another Red Mountain.
Oh, he said it quite a bit.
Oh, what else were you going to say? Another Red Mountain racer. Here we go again.
So it kept happening because I said at the Pontiac Cup up in Jasper, I said I want 6 in the top 5. I don't care who ties, and then results were out, and I went, "Whew, 5 in the top 7, not bad. Way to go, Stan! You came 7th."
That actually might be good for the museum to get a recording of that. Just in saying that.
Oh, just the comment.
As part of your video
Yeah.
streams or whatever. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, CBC's got to have some of that stuff.
But to watch them turn their heads like puppies, you know.
Where
6 in the top 5.
You're talking about the good skis and about the where did you guys get your equipment once your mother stopped sewing your suits for you?
Yeah. Well, we were really fortunate actually, and Grant was a big part of this. Did we all get sponsored by Rossland?
Yeah,
we did.
Eventually, yeah.
I worked really hard
And
for
we got
that.
3 pairs of skis each, so we were 12, 13.
Yeah,
12, 13.
13 at least.
And that was a huge deal. I mean, our parents weren't poor, but they weren't wealthy, very middle class.
Well,
And
they're
so
in here
it was a
too.
big deal for us.
Up
And
when all
that's
of
kinda
them were
how we
standing
started.
with their Rutherglen.
and then we all ended up, on different equipment and
Yeah.
got sponsored and so forth. I mean, actually, I think it was probably the last skis we all bought until we ended our career.
Yeah.
Way more affordable than I think what
Yeah.
Derek's
It's
seeing
Derek's
now.
kids, yeah.
Oh yeah, so
Yeah.
so that's all.
I was on
all
diet.
4 of us there have the Rossigno skis that I mostly a little bit with Jim Haight, but a lot of it was other coaches that helped us.
Yeah.
And we had to get a hold of the Rossigno rep and say, look, these guys are going somewhere. How'd you like to give us some skis?
I don't think I got sponsored till I was 16, and I had Dynastar first, and then I had
And Felix was already
Fi-
Dynastar.
Fisher. Yeah, Felix was on Dynastar, and then I had Fisher skis for a couple of years.
Then you went to Rossi.
And then I went to Rossi.
But yeah, we were helped out. Yeah, it was probably 13.
Yeah.
From the time we were 13 on, we didn't buy our equipment anymore.
No.
At that time, it's not
No.
the same now.
Oh.
The companies can't.
And
do
we
that.
would, we would go to a race and you would, get up in the morning, go for a little run, then we'd ski all day, and then we'd go home, watch video of our skiing, and then we'd work an hour and a half on our skis, and kind of go to bed at 9:30, 10 o'clock, and do it all over again the next day. And even the kids now don't do their own skis, do they, Derek?
And you had to file them with a file.
Yeah.
Most don't. Not like most don't. No, there's many options. Even like in Kelowna, for example, Wade Christie, who
Right.
is also on the ski team, is
Yeah.
a race tuner, and
Right.
most of the local kids will bring him their stuff.
skis.
Yeah, so they'll do that. But then when it was us, we were responsible for our own stuff. And
Yeah.
I took my downhills to Wade and paid him handsomely, and I improved my time on the over the hill downhill by a lot.
Even on the national team, our first year, we were on Roswell, and Chris and I would. Remember
Ralph in the bag.
Ralph in a bag. Yeah, we went to one camp, and then this what was Ralph Jensen.
Ralph Jensen.
Ralph Jensen was a service rep for one rep, and we went, awesome, Ralph's a service rep. We got a service rep, but not when we started racing. And then we went to the Roswell factory in France, and they said, here, we'll give you a bunch of tools. So we got a little bag with a bunch of files and stuff, and then so we called it Ralph in the
Ralph in
bag.
the bag.
And then we would just work on our skis, like we would finish training, go work on all our skis for the next day, up the hill, and then watch a video. It was exhausting, actually.
It was a long day, yeah.
And then we switched to. Eventually, they started. That's when they actually brought Ralph back after that, and he
Yeah.
started working on people because you didn't get a service rep till you were doing a little better. And then when we switched to Fisher,
Yeah. And then
we
you
started-
switched ahead.
then I switched ahead. Yeah, and then we had Hammerly was the man. So
Take
Things are
a
easier
look
when
at that,
service rep.
and look at my boots, and look at your boots.
What are you seeing?
What do you mean?
they've got snow underneath them. It's probably
Oh,
what he's commenting
propped
about.
up, is that what you're saying?
Grant was always concerned because we were all 6 feet or so tall, and Grant would always pile up the snow so that he could be tall
Looking
enough.
short. I'm only 5'8", just like Chris.
Yeah.
So all the pictures that you see in the book, check
Snow
the
under
boots.
Okay.
Europe's a lot different when it comes to racing. Still,
Check the boots.
I mean, it's still crazy about ski racing. There's still hundreds of thousands of fans that show up at all the World Cup races where there's slalom and GS, and all the people. Like my final service rep, Heinz Hammerly, he's very well known service rep around the world. He just retired, and he's sort of a bit of a celebrity over there as well. But the one year we were racing there, it doesn't really fit into it, but it's an interesting story. We were ski testing, and he prepared all the skis, and then he had to get them, bring them down the mountain at the end of the day, and he fell and punctured a lung actually, but he was a chain smoker as well. So this is mid-season. Felix and I were both on head skis, and he was our rep.
And so he had to go to the hospital. And Felix, we got another guy coming in to do our skis for a little bit. And then Heinz came back. Like, you know, he was out of the hospital, you're back working again right away. And he couldn't move very much. And I remember looking at him and so we were doing everything. We were packing our skis, everything we can do. He just filed them and waxed them for us, and we did everything else. And I remember talking to him after and said, Heinz, like he's still chain smoking like crazy. And I'm going, Heinz, what'd you do in the hospital for smoking? He goes, oh yeah, sure. Me and my doctor go out on the deck and have a cigarette. And I'm going, you're in the hospital with a punctured lung and you're smoking a cigarette on the deck. But they were all still like those, all the Europeans are crazy for ski racing over there. So he was back right away. A week in the hospital, that was it. So.
And I think the other thing, like for us, it really set our lives up. Like it really, I think we all worked hard.
Oh yeah.
Because it was kind of what we always did.
Very important.
And so,
Yeah.
you know, I think it was really a great, you know, base for us to
It
start
was
our lives.
fantastic.
So
Work
true.
ethic was built right in, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The moment we came out.
So what was the rule at the ski areas after you finish your meal? You had to return the tray.
Oh, man, you're talking about manners you taught us. Oh, we had to thank when we got our tickets to the ticket booth, we had to go thank the lady.
You had to thank people and you had to return your tray at the ski lodges.
Why are you pointing at me?
And then,
I always had my lunch from home, so it didn't matter.
no, at the ski races when
Oh,
we
yeah.
got to Jasper, for example.
Yeah.
But I remember Karen Lee actually mentioned this. I used to teach them how to set a table properly, English. You put your thumb on the corner of the table. Do you remember me teaching you that? And that's where you put the knife. So that was your measurement for setting the table with the cutlery. So I taught these guys this, and Kelly and Karen Lee remember it more than you guys would. But I taught them how to set the table to take your trays and your garbage up. Yeah, just because you're a ski racer doesn't mean you can get up from the table and leave all your junk all over it. But they were pretty good, so I didn't have to say more than once, eh? One or two ski areas.
Expanding on what Chris said, I think setting us up for life, and I consider myself extremely fortunate that we had that an upbringing that was completely unique compared to whatever else you'll see. You know, like we were doing stuff when we were 15, 16, taking care of ourselves because we had to. You know, nobody else was going to do that, and what we saw and what we experienced, I mean, it was just an unbelievable experience, and man, I just think we were so lucky we had that back in the day, and it did definitely.
But it showed. It showed because that's what first thing Glenn Riddell said. Well, what you suited those guys. I mean, he wanted more guys like these guys, and we had a rule, and we had some. But it was a work ethic, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. More of a work ethic thing. They took it upon themselves to make good that work ethic as a group.
I just want to say I'm really proud of the success of these guys, what they've done with their careers, and
Yeah.
you know.
That's something actually when you look back of the group that we started with, that 12 or 13, 15 people, and there was Lex Wandel and Kerry Martin and Nancy Joe O'Neill came. They came from out of town and joined the Red Mountain Racers. That was one thing that we were offering. Parents would offer a billet system, and you could train and become a Red Mountain Racer. And this particular group, you know, took advantage of all the opportunities that they could have. And now, when I look at that whole group, you know, Lori Haight was one of the chief nurses in Kelowna. Mm-hmm. Dee Dee and her husband had that business.
Mm-hmm. The importing business from Switzerland, right?
Yeah, and Mooney had his own shops. Auto body shops. You know, and he was.
This Mike Mooney.
Michael Mooney was part of these guys in the group, and we had some pretty good stories with the kids when they were that age, because they were just kind of getting old enough. But all that group, and
Stan Hansen created a roofing company.
Yeah, he
very,
got
very
his own-
successful in that.
Very successful kids. They turned out.
But this has been fun because, like, we don't get to go. I mean, I haven't seen Derek in
It's been a while.
a long time. I see Donnie, I see Brian a bit, but
I've
yeah,
seen
so
him
it's
for
been
50
fun.
years.
And I haven't seen Grant for a while, so it's
We're
been,
retired now, so we have no excuses.
yeah, no, it's good. So it's just it's really nice, and it's kind of fun to look back and I don't think we were really anything special. We just were kind of a bunch of young people having fun, and
Right time, right place.
yeah, and Rossland was really a big part of that, I think. So cool.